Hello, I'm Guy Goodell, pastor at Bible Baptist Church here in Hudson Falls, New York. And I want to speak to you today about elusive contentment. Elusive contentment. Let me read you a passage from Philippians chapter 4, verse 10. Paul is writing from death row in Rome and knows that he very soon will be facing the loss of his own life for his stand for the gospel. Here's what he writes. But I rejoiced in the Lord greatly that now at the last your care of me hath flourished again, wherein you were also careful, but you lacked opportunity. Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am therewith to be content. I know both how to be abased and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. So Paul's talking here about something that we lack the skill of spiritually quite frequently, and that is the ability to be content with what God allows into our lives. In my 80 years of living, I've only met a handful of people who were really content in the sense that the Bible talks about it. Most people want more money. Most people want more power. Most people want to raise their position. They want to achieve prestige, or they want some type of formal recognition. So they're always looking for more. And when they talk, the conversation is saturated with expressions of personal dissatisfaction. In fact, discontentment oozes from their words in almost every sentence they speak. 68 years I've been in the ministry, and I've encountered many loving Christians dedicated to the Lord, serving the Lord, having a strong personal relationship with the Lord. But even those people have told me on occasion, I need to be more content with what God allows in my life. Elusive contentment. In my early ministry, probably the first 15 or so years, I was not content even with my ministry. I was caught up in that fundamentalist rat race where you have to do more, be like somebody else, get bigger, do more of this, do more of that. And I don't remember exactly when it happened, but at some point in my ministry, I became aware more about how God's will worked. And I found out that in the Bible, there's a general will. If you got saved at some point, I got saved at some point, somebody in Russia got saved, somebody in Haiti got saved. I found out that there's a certain part of God's will that fits all of us. Romans 8:28 and 29 says, all believers are to seek to be conformed to the image of God's Son. But there's also specifics in the will of God. Every believer has an aspect of God's will which that believer and no one else is expected to follow and to carry out. In my experience, leaders in modern day fundamentalism follow what I call the assembly line approach concerning God's will. You come and fit into our mold here and let us make you like us. Well, I think Paul had this in mind in the following verses 10 through 14 that we just read. Writing from death row in Rome, Paul said, I have learned to be content. Wow. That dawned on me when I read that one of the man who wrote most of the New Testament after the Gospels, there was a time in his life when he wasn't content, and he had to learn to be content. He said, I've learned to be content. Look at the word content. The word is actually a combination of two words. The first word is autos, a reflexive pronoun meaning yourself, and the second word is archeo, which means to ward off, to erect a barrier against, to be satisfied, to be sufficient, to be content. If you combine the two words, they form this Greek word, autarkes. And the idea is to avoid self-focus, to build a barrier against yourself's interference with the will of God, to turn attention away from yourself. Paul's idea of contentment is to prevent self, with all the baggage that comes with a sinful nature, to prevent it from getting in the way of what God allows into our lives. He said that he had to learn this skill. The word learn is an interesting word. It's the word manthano. It means to learn through any type of device or method that a teacher uses. but it carries with it the idea of especially understanding how God is working. So many of us are dissatisfied with what God allows into our lives, leading us to our discontentment. Now, what happens when we get discontent? That is fertile ground for producing that often expressed question that we ask and that we hear other people ask a lot. Why, God? I've asked that many times. Paul did not ask why. He wasn't asking God why he ended up on death row. He wasn't asking God why he had suffered shipwreck and stoning and all the other things. However, speaking from the level of his contentment that he had learned, he told us why he had suffered so much. Philippians 1:12, listen to it. But I would ye should understand, brethren, that the things which happened unto me have fallen out rather unto the furtherance of the gospel. Catch that, the furtherance of the gospel. Now let me ask you a question. Are you willing to accept from God and be content with what he allows or directs into your life so as to make the gospel of Jesus Christ more available to those who need to hear it? I ask myself that question frequently. We don't want to be one of the why askers, right? Why did God take my young wife for husband? Why did God allow my child to be born with cancer? Why is my health failing when I want to serve God and I can't do it? Why did I lose my job when I need to provide for my family? Why do people suffer if God is a loving God? Why did that automobile accident leave me paralyzed for life? And the list of why questions goes on, seemingly endless to those who have not learned to be content. You see, being content and serving God has been one of the great problems in my personal life. I'm easily drawn into responding with dissatisfaction when it comes to regarding the methods that God uses in order to develop me into the person he wants me to be. So I am learning to be content. I can't say with Paul, I have learned, but I am learning to be content. We tend to give areas in our lives in which we could never be content. I've heard people say that. But you see, that excuse doesn't work with God. If there is an area in which you and I have not been content, then we ought to start learning to be content in that area. Paul intended for us to see this. Notice he said that I've learned to be content in whatsoever state I am in. So if you and I are not content in every area, then we should start doing our homework. We should get engaged in this learning process. Let me say something about the flexibility of biblical contentment. Paul says here, I've learned to be abased, and that word in the Greek means humiliated, brought down to absolute lowness. I've learned to abound. That word means increased, abounding, running over, having more than necessary, full, to gorge, to be fully supplied, satisfied, and hungry, to be famished, to crave, to be hungry. So why could Paul face all of this and still say, I have learned to be content? The answer is in the concept of the will. You see, if we are self-willed, if we haven't built a barrier against self, that leads us to discontentment. We learn to be discontented. But if we are preoccupied with the will of God, we've turned our back on ourself. That leads us to contentment. If we make the excuse, I just can't be content all the time in every situation. So if we make that statement, we are correct. We can't do it. Paul has an answer for that too in verse 13. He said, the Lord Jesus Christ can help me become anything I want to be. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. Well, I hope that today you will learn to be content. Be patient with yourself and rest in the will of God. This is Guy Goodell, pastor of Bible Baptist Church, here on the corner of West and Feeder Streets in Hudson Falls, inviting you to come join with us. And remember, be content.